He was laughing. Inside the courtroom, sitting comfortably in his chair, watching his wife stand there alone, that smile on his face was the kind that appears when someone is already convinced they've won. When Sarah Mitchell stood before the judge without a lawyer, it wasn't just her husband who reacted. A few people in the courtroom smiled, some exchanged looks, others quietly laughed. To them it was obvious. She was weak, she was unprepared. She didn't stand a chance. Her husband, Daniel Mitchell, sat confidently beside his attorney, dressed in an expensive suit, leaning back as if the outcome was already decided. He whispered to his lawyer, "She won't last long." Sarah heard it, but she didn't respond. No anger, no panic, just silence. And in a courtroom, silence is often mistaken for weakness. The judge called the case to order. Daniel's lawyer spoke first. He talked about financial dependence. He talked about lack of contribution. He talked as if Daniel had built everything alone. Daniel nodded along, that same smile still on his face. Everything sounded like it was going exactly as planned. Then the judge turned toward Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "you may present your defense." A low murmur spread across the room. Will she even speak? Does she understand the law? Representing herself is a mistake. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. Sarah stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. No files in her hands, no notes, no lawyer standing beside her. And that's why they laughed. Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm not here to save my marriage," she said. "I'm here to tell the truth." The laughter stopped. Not instantly, but enough to change the room. Daniel's smile tightened. Sarah continued. "I've been described as dependent," she said, "as someone who contributed nothing." She paused and looked directly at Daniel. "But what hasn't been said," she continued, "is that everything he owns was built while I stood behind him." The room shifted. The judge leaned forward. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack. She explained. She spoke about sacrifices made quietly, opportunities given up, support provided without recognition. "I wasn't at the office," she said, "but I made it possible for him to be there." Daniel straightened in his chair. This wasn't what he expected. Sarah looked back at the judge. "I chose to speak for myself," she said, "because no one understands this marriage better than I do." The courtroom was completely silent now. No laughter, no whispers. Daniel's confidence was fading, and Sarah was just getting started. Sarah's words hung in the air. For a moment no one spoke, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even Daniel. The courtroom, which had laughed only minutes ago, was now listening. Daniel shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie. The smile he had worn so confidently was gone. His lawyer leaned closer to him, whispering something under his breath. The judge nodded slowly. "Continue, Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah took another breath. "They said I depended on him," she said. "They said I took without giving." She looked around the room, but dependence doesn't look the same from the inside. She turned slightly toward Daniel. "When we got married, I had my own career," she said. "I stepped away from it because we agreed I would support his." Daniel's lawyer stood up. Objection. The judge raised his hand. Let her speak. That single sentence changed everything. Sarah continued. "I managed the home. I handled finances he didn't have time for. I moved cities when his work required it." Her voice stayed calm, controlled. "Those choices didn't come with paychecks," she said, "but they came with cost." The courtroom remained silent. Daniel crossed his arms. Sarah didn't look at him. "When his career grew," she said, "my life became smaller." A juror shifted in their seat. Sarah took a step forward. "Every asset he listed as his," she said, "was built during our marriage." She paused. "Built while I carried the weight no one saw." Daniel's lawyer stood again, clearly unsettled. "These claims are emotional, not legal." "They're factual," Sarah said calmly. The judge turned toward the lawyer. "Sit down." Daniel's jaw tightened. Sarah reached the desk in front of her. "For years I was told my work didn't count," she said, "that I wasn't contributing." She looked at the judge. "But I have records," she said. "Bank statements, emails, agreements we made privately." Daniel looked up sharply. Sarah met his eyes for the first time. "You didn't think I kept anything," she said. But I did. The courtroom shifted again. Sarah placed her hands on the desk. I'm not asking for sympathy, she said. I'm asking this court to see the whole picture. The judge leaned forward. Do you have documentation to support these statements? Yes, Sarah replied. Daniel's lawyer whispered urgently to him. Sarah stood still, composed. The story you heard before, she said, was incomplete. She paused. And the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Daniel looked away. The room waited. The judge studied Sarah for a long moment. Then he nodded. You may submit your documents. A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Daniel straightened in his seat. This wasn't part of the plan. Sarah stepped forward and handed the folder to the court clerk. It wasn't thick. It wasn't dramatic. But it was organized. Emails, bank records, written agreements from years earlier. Proof of decisions made together. Proof of sacrifices discussed and agreed upon. Daniel's lawyer flipped through the pages, his expression changing with each one. He leaned toward Daniel and whispered again, this time faster. Daniel's jaw tightened. The judge skimmed the documents, then looked up. These records show joint decisions, he said, and shared financial responsibility. Daniel's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, these documents don't change ownership. They change context, the judge replied calmly. Sarah remained still. She didn't interrupt. She didn't smile. She waited. The judge looked back at her. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, why did you choose to represent yourself? Sarah answered without hesitation. Because this case isn't just about numbers, she said. It's about years that don't show up on paper unless someone explains them. She looked briefly toward Daniel. I lived those years. The courtroom felt different now. No one was laughing. No one was whispering. People were watching Daniel instead. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Sarah continued. I was told my work had no value, she said, but everything here was built during our marriage. She gestured gently toward the documents. I didn't disappear, she said. I made space for him to grow. Daniel's lawyer tried again. These are personal interpretations. The judge raised his hand. No, he said. They're relevant. That word landed hard. Daniel looked at Sarah for the first time without confidence. The judge addressed the room. This court will take a short recess to review the submitted material. He paused, then added, and when we return, we will continue with a full reassessment of this case. Sarah nodded once. Daniel leaned back in his chair, no longer smiling. The balance had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. When the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere had changed completely. It no longer felt like a place where one side had control. It felt like a place where questions were finally being asked. The judge returned to his seat with a thick stack of papers in front of him. He didn't speak immediately. He read every page, every line. Daniel sat rigidly beside his lawyer, fingers pressed together, his foot tapping lightly against the floor. The confidence he had walked in with was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Sarah remained calm. She sat exactly where she had been before, hands folded, posture straight. She wasn't watching Daniel. She wasn't watching the jury. She was watching the judge, because she knew this part mattered. The judge finally looked up. These documents, he said slowly, indicate shared decision-making throughout the marriage. Daniel's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. I'm not finished. The room fell silent. Multiple accounts show consistent transfers, the judge continued. Not random, not one-sided. Coordinated. Daniel swallowed. The judge turned a page. There are emails here discussing relocation for employment, he said. Emails where Mrs. Mitchell expressed concern about leaving her own work behind. Sarah didn't move. And responses acknowledging that sacrifice, the judge added. Daniel's lawyer shifted in his seat. These emails don't establish legal ownership, he said quickly. They establish intent, the judge replied. That single word changed everything. Intent. The judge turned his attention to Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, you stated earlier that your contributions were dismissed. Yes, Sarah replied. Explain how. Sarah stood. I was told that because my work didn't generate income, she said, it didn't count. She paused. But the decisions we made as a couple were based on that work. She looked toward the jury. When he traveled, I managed everything at home, she said. When his hours grew longer, I handled finances, moves, schedules, planning. She took a breath. I didn't disappear, she said. I adjusted. Daniel's lawyer stood again. Adjustment isn't contribution, he said sharply. The judge looked at him. Sit down. The lawyer did. Sarah continued. When his career advanced, my name wasn't on contracts, she said. But my time was. The courtroom was completely focused now. No one looked bored. No one looked distracted. Sarah's voice didn't waver. There were years when every decision in our marriage revolved around what was best for his work, she said. And I agreed to that. She paused. Not because I was dependent, she added, but because we were partners. Daniel shifted in his seat again. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, he said, do you dispute that these decisions were made jointly? Daniel hesitated. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Daniel straightened. No, he said finally. But that doesn't mean. That's enough, the judge interrupted. Daniel stopped speaking. The judge turned back to Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, why was this not presented earlier in the proceedings? Sarah answered honestly. Because I was told it wouldn't matter, she said, that without a lawyer, I wouldn't be taken seriously. The judge looked around the room. That assumption, he said, was incorrect. The jury listened closely. The judge continued. This court does not measure contributions solely in paychecks, he said. Marriage is not a transaction. Daniel's lawyer looked down. The judge addressed the room again. When one partner advances at the expense of another's opportunities, he said, that context must be considered. Sarah felt the weight of those words, not relief, recognition. The judge flipped another page. There are also records here of delayed career opportunities, he said, looking at Sarah. Positions declined, offers postponed. Yes, Sarah replied. Why? Because moving again was better for his promotion, she said. At least that's what we decided together. Daniel clenched his jaw. The judge looked at him. Did you ever object to those decisions at the time? The judge asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. No, he said quietly. The courtroom felt heavier. The judge nodded. That matters, he said. Sarah sat down slowly. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't emotional. She was precise. Daniel's lawyer attempted one last redirection. Your Honor, even if we accept shared decision-making, he said, this does not automatically entitle. It entitles this court to reconsider the narrative, the judge replied. That word again, narrative. The judge addressed the jury. You were initially presented with a simplified version of this marriage, he said. You are now seeing complexity. He paused. Complexity does not favor one side, he added. It favors fairness. Daniel stared straight ahead. Sarah felt her shoulders relax slightly, not because she was winning, but because she was finally being understood. The judge concluded, this court will proceed with a full reassessment of marital contribution and asset distribution. He looked directly at Daniel. No assumptions will be made. The room absorbed that. As the judge called a brief pause, people began to move slowly. Conversations were quiet, thoughtful. Daniel no longer looked certain. Sarah remained seated for a moment longer, not out of fear, out of resolve. She had carried the truth for years. Now the room was carrying it with her. When the hearing resumed, the courtroom no longer felt divided into sides. It felt divided into past and present, what people thought they knew, and what was now unfolding in front of them. Daniel sat straighter than before, but his posture no longer carried confidence. His lawyer whispered constantly, flipping through notes, clearly calculating strategy. Sarah remained quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned when to speak. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Mitchell, he said, this court has reviewed the material submitted by Mrs. Mitchell. Daniel nodded once. Before we move further, the judge continued, I want clarity on the financial structure of your marriage. He turned a page. These assets were acquired during the marriage, the judge said. Properties, investments, accounts. Daniel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, those assets were acquired through my client's income. The judge looked up, and supported by decisions made jointly, he replied. Daniel's lawyer paused. That may be true in theory, he said, but contribution must be measurable. The judge leaned forward slightly. Then let's measure it. The courtroom grew still. The judge addressed Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, you mentioned earlier that your career was put on hold. Yes, Sarah replied. How many times? The judge asked. Sarah thought for a moment. 3 major opportunities, she said, and several smaller ones. The judge nodded. Explain. Sarah stood. The first was when we moved for his promotion, she said. I had just been offered a position that would have put me on a long-term path. Daniel looked down. I declined it, Sarah continued, because we agreed his role would provide stability for both of us. She paused. The second time, she said, I was encouraged to wait, and then to wait again. Her voice remained steady, and eventually, she said, waiting became normal. The judge turned toward Daniel. Did you benefit from these decisions? He asked. Daniel hesitated. Yes, he said. The courtroom felt that answer. The judge continued. And were these decisions discussed at the time? Yes. Agreed upon? Yes. Sarah didn't react. She didn't need to. The judge addressed Daniel's lawyer. You argued earlier that Mrs. Mitchell was dependent, he said, but dependency implies lack of agency. He paused. These records show agency, he added, just not visibility. Daniel's lawyer shifted. Your Honor, marriage involves compromise. Compromise does not erase value, the judge replied. The judge turned back to Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, did you ever receive direct compensation for these sacrifices? No, Sarah replied. Did you expect to? No, she said honestly, because we were married. The courtroom absorbed that. The judge nodded slowly. That distinction matters. He turned toward the jury. When someone steps back so another can move forward, he said, the benefit does not vanish simply because it isn't itemized. Daniel exhaled slowly. The judge flipped to another section of the documents. There are communications here, he said, where Mr. Mitchell acknowledges reliance on Mrs. Mitchell's support. Daniel's lawyer attempted to speak. The judge raised a hand. I'm aware of the argument, he said, but acknowledgement carries weight. He looked at Daniel. Do you deny sending these messages? Daniel shook his head. No. Sarah remained still. The judge continued. This court will not ignore years of unpaid labor simply because it occurred outside an office. That sentence landed like a verdict, though it wasn't one yet. Danny. Elle's lawyer leaned back, his options narrowing. The judge addressed Sarah again. Mrs. Mitchell, he said. Some might ask why you didn't insist on legal protection earlier. Sarah answered without hesitation. Because I trusted my marriage, she said, and because I believed partnership didn't require contracts. The judge nodded. That belief, he said, is not negligence. Daniel looked up sharply. The judge continued. This court recognizes that fairness in divorce requires examining what was built. Together, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not victory. Validation. The judge concluded this phase. The court will now proceed to reevaluate asset division based on contribution, sacrifice, and shared intent. He paused, and assumptions made earlier will be set aside. Daniel stared forward. The story he'd relied on was unraveling, not because Sarah was louder, but because she was precise. And as the court prepared to move forward, one thing was clear. This case was no longer about who earned more. It was about who carried what. When the court resumed, there was no tension left in the air. There was focus, the kind that comes when a story has been stripped down to what truly matters. Daniel sat quietly now. Not confident, not defensive. Just still. His lawyer had stopped whispering strategies and instead reviewed notes with a careful, almost cautious expression. Sarah remained composed. She had learned that this stage of the case didn't require emotion. It required clarity. The judge looked from one side of the courtroom to the other. This court has heard arguments about contribution, he said. It has reviewed documents, communicate, ions, and timelines. He paused. Now we must address responsibility. Daniel lifted his head slightly. Marriage, the judge continued, creates shared outcomes, not just shared benefits, but shared consequences. He turned toward Daniel. Mr. Mitchell, he said, you've argued that your financial success was the result of individual effort. Daniel nodded. Yes, he said. I worked hard. No one is disputing that, the judge replied. But effort does not exist in isolation. He looked down at the records again. These documents show repeated reliance on your spouse's availability, flexibility, and support. Daniel shifted in his seat. The judge looked up. Without that support, he asked calmly, would the same opportunities have been possible? Daniel hesitated. His lawyer glanced at him. I don't know, Daniel said finally. The courtroom felt the weight of that answer. The judge nodded. That uncertainty matters, he said. He turned to Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, did you ever believe your sacrifices would be dismissed as insignificant? Sarah answered quietly. Yes. Why? The judge asked. Because they were never visible, she said. They happened behind closed doors. The judge leaned forward slightly. Explain. Sarah stood. When decisions were made, they were framed as temporary, she said. A short pause. A small compromise. She paused. But years passed. The room listened. I wasn't building a resume, she said. I was building stability. She looked at the judge. And stability doesn't show up on balance sheets. Daniel looked away. The judge nodded slowly. This court acknowledges that, he said. He turned toe. The jury. You were initially shown a version of this marriage where contribution was measured narrowly, he said. You have now seen evidence that challenges that measure. He paused. Fairness requires expansion. Daniel's lawyer stood once more. Your Honor, he said, even if we accept these arguments, division must still remain proportional. The judge looked at him. Proportional to what? He asked. To income, the lawyer replied. The judge shook his head slightly. No, he said, proportional to investment. The courtroom fell completely silent. Time is an investment, the judge continued. So is sacrifice. So is trust. Daniel swallowed. The judge addressed Sarah again. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, did you ever attempt to re-enter your field? Yes, Sarah replied. And what happened? The judge asked. I was behind, she said. The industry had moved forward. She paused. And I had moved with him instead. The judge nodded. That loss is not theoretical, he said. It is real. Daniel's lawyer looked down. The judge continued. This court will not pretend that one partner's advancement occurred independently of the other's restraint. He turned toward Daniel. Your success was supported, he said. That support has value. Daniel didn't respond. The judge then looked back at the jury. You will be asked to consider fairness, he said. Not sympathy, not punishment. He paused. Fairness. The words settled deeply. The judge concluded the session. This court will now move toward final determination of asset division, he said, based on shared intent, shared responsibility, and documented contribution. Sarah felt something. Release inside her chest. Not relief. Not joy. Closure. Daniel sat silently, staring ahead. The laughter from the beginning of the case felt distant now, almost unreal. The courtroom no longer saw a confident husband and a helpless wife. They saw two people whose lives had been intertwined and whose outcomes could no longer be separated so easily. As the session ended, the judge added one final instruction. Both parties will return for the final ruling. Sarah nodded once. Daniel said nothing. The room slowly emptied. Sarah remained seated for a moment, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She was waiting for resolution. The courtroom was quiet when everyone returned. Not tense, not uncertain. Quiet in the way a room becomes when the end is near. Sarah sat in the same place she had sat since the beginning, back straight, hands folded. Daniel sat across from her, no longer leaning back, no longer confident. His lawyer whispered nothing now. There was nothing left to whisper. The judge entered and took his seat. Everyone stood, then sat. The judge looked down at his notes one last time. This court has reviewed all evidence, he said, all testimony, all documentation. He paused. And the history of this marriage. Daniel looked up. This case began with assumptions, the judge continued. About strength, about contribution, about value. He looked toward Sarah. Those assumptions were incomplete. Sarah felt her breath slow. The judge turned toward Daniel. Mr. Mitchell, he said, you presented a version of this marriage where success appeared individual. Daniel said nothing, but the evidence shows otherwise, the judge continued. It shows shared decisions, shared sacrifices, and shared outcomes. The courtroom listened without moving. This court recognizes that Mrs. Mitchell's contributions were not visible in paychecks, the judge said, but they were essential. He paused. Support, time, restraint, and trust have value. Daniel lowered his gaze. The judge straightened. Therefore, he said, this court finds that the marital assets must be divided with full consideration of non-financial contribution. Sarah's hands tightened slightly, not in fear, in release. The division will reflect partnership, the judge said, not hierarchy. Daniel's lawyer looked down at his papers. The judge continued. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, turning towards Sarah, your role in this marriage has been recognized by this court. Sarah nodded once. No smile, no tears, just acknowledgement. This ruling is final, the judge said. The sound of the gavel echoed softly. It was over. For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom began to shift. Chairs scraped lightly. People stood. Daniel remained seated. The man who had laughed at the beginning of the case now stared at the floor. Sarah stood, not slowly, not dramatically, steadily. She didn't look at Daniel as she walked forward. She didn't need to. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter. Someone asked her how she felt. Sarah paused. I feel seen, she said. And that was enough. She walked away, not victorious, not bitter, just free.